Hey everyone, and welcome. I've waffled a bit on my League starter build for the Forbidden Sanctum launch tomorrow, but I think not as much as I usually do, and I've settled in at this point. In this video, I'll describe which build I considered, which ones I discarded and why, and ultimately what I settled on. I will show off a very cool and useful League starting tool that was recently showcased on Reddit, and then I'm going to say a little bit about my League start currency strategy. So to begin with, here's a selection of some of the builds that I considered for this league. I looked at Crackling Lance Inquisitor, the typical Poison Seismic Trap Saboteur, Summon Raging Spirits Necromancer, Enki's Arc Elementalist, which I've previously made a first 4-acts detailed guide video about. I thought maybe about putting my money where my mouth is and walking through that. I looked at Bone Shatter Juggernaut, Explosive Arrow Ballista Totem Champion, Corrupting Fever Kinetic Blast Gladiator, and Poison Blade Vortex Trickster. I also considered a few others that I had previously league started with successfully, like Poisonous Concoction Pathfinder, Righteous Fire Inquisitor, but I've kind of got a soft rule, not a firm one, but a little bit of a rule about not league starting the same thing twice. I don't always do this. Occasionally there's a repeat, but usually I try to go for something new. So I was strongly leaning towards Blade Vortex Trickster, mostly because I didn't try up the reworked Trickster Ascendancy last league. And I was leaning so hard towards this that actually last week I test leveled this character fully through the campaign and into early and mid maps. And honestly, I like it. I really do. I think it's got a lot going for it. It's fun. The new Trickster Ascendancy is interesting. I do think that there are some players who could have a good time with this build at league start, but for me personally, there was just a couple factors that led me to look to some other options. So one is that, kind of like the Poisonous Concoction, you go with a Plague Bearer playstyle, which just, the timing on that has never really appealed to me. It's just a little bit of a hassle. I also was finding the early mapping experience slightly lackluster. It wasn't outright difficult or anything, just not as smooth and breezy as I'd like in a league starter. Like, it felt like a little bit more of a struggle than I was like. So I decided to try something else out. I grabbed an old standard league level 92 champion that I had just sitting around, and luckily it had a pretty similar skill tree, similar enough that I could easily respec to Explosive Arrow Ballista without breaking the bank. So I tried to be fair here to see what it would be like at the beginning of maps. I didn't allocate all my skill points. I used some basic life and resist gear, a really shitty bow that just had like attack speed on it and nothing else. And I didn't even use upgraded gems. I didn't have any. I used level 1 gems. I threw them into a 6 link and did some white maps. And even with shitty gear, level 1 gems, all that stuff, I was astonished that it was actually holding its own. And then, of course, as the gems started to level up pretty quickly, it started to do more than hold its own. And so, I tried a couple different variations on it. I made a more expensive bow in the kind of, a couple divine price range, maybe. Put a little bit better of a chest piece on it, that kind of a thing. And it definitely progressed as you would expect for those kind of upgrades. So that was promising to me. Seemed to improve at a pretty steady rate. So for me, that was enough to try a practice run through with it. And in the course of doing so, I experimented with a few different leveling setups to actually get to the point where you switch over to Explosive Arrow Ballista, which happens around Act 4. I just wanted to see which of them I liked best. So honestly, I didn't get to the end of the campaign. I found the leveling process very smooth as I was going. The only thing that was slowing me down, honestly, was the fact that the skill was so new and interesting to me that I kept stopping to blow up packs. You get this ignite proliferation, like this whole pack exploding animation, really early. Like, usually you have to wait until at least your 3rd or 4th labyrinth, or you have to wait until maps before a character can start literally popping packs like that. So like, I was so fascinated, I kept stopping. And so I'm glad that I leveled the character, because maybe that will I've gotten my time in, and I won't want to do that on League Start. I can kind of focus up and get through the campaign faster now. So in the end, I decided on kind of a fusion of a few different leveling styles, but the majority of the credit really does have to go to Zizarin, who has put out several videos on this build, and I took a pretty good chunk of how I'm going to level this build from him. So just put briefly, what am I going to do? I am going to start with splitting steel the way Zizaran has it. Just find the beefiest two-handed weapon I can at the very start. If I get lucky, maybe I can make one with vendor recipe if I happen to find the items for it. But really, not too big a deal even if I don't find stuff for the vendor recipe, because honestly, by the time I face Mervale at the end of Act 1, I really would like to switch to what is, in my opinion, the second best leveling setup in the game, and the best that is available to this character class, Poisonous Concoction. Like I said, the Plague Bearer style isn't my favorite, but really at this point, Plague Bearer isn't necessary. I don't even know if it's available yet. Just at Act 2, I'm just going to set down that big fat axe in favor of a dex-based shield, no main hand weapon, and just start flinging flasks at people for the next couple of acts. It isn't long. It's, I think, towards the end of Act 3, maybe, being in the range of level 28 plus and having a chance orb available. So as long as I've got the appropriate gem links and I've got a chance orb when the level hits, then I'm just going to switch over right then and there. That's the way I did it in this practice leveling setup. Just get the explosive arrow gem and the Ballista totems gem, hop to it. I really do prefer leveling as my main build for as long as possible. Just personal preference. Some people don't mind going straight through to maps on a leveling setup and then switching. Just not my thing. So I'm glad that I can switch before the midway point in the campaign. I think that's great. Actually, you're even switching before your first ascendancy. That's pretty darn good in the realm of how quickly you can switch to your main skill. The only con to leveling this build, and honestly it's fairly minor, is that your first labyrinth doesn't come until very late. Because your first lab that you're going to take is the one that actually relies on your second lab. It's the one that gives you all kinds of bonuses for being fortified, but you don't get permanent fortify until your second lab. So really, you end up taking labs 1 and 2 at the same time, which, at least it makes that first lab very easy because you're way over leveled by the time you do it. But, it's a con in the sense that you kind of come to expect around Act 3 or 4 that you get this big power boost, and you're going to be lacking that in a sense for this leveling process. But at the same time, the EA Ballista Totem playstyle is so strong that you're actually probably not going to notice the lack of Ascendancy. And then when you do get your Ascendancies 1 and 2 on Act 7, yeah, I can imagine that that's going to feel real good. Also, in terms of drawbacks, Zizaran does mention, and he's right, I get where he's coming from, the kind of small startup time between when you click the skill and then when you see the damage, because in between there, your totem has to pop up and then fire, and then the explosion waits a beat. Overall, it's like a second and a half before the explosion happens. But honestly, if you've ever played any kind of dot build, any kind of minion build, I think you probably have a sort of tolerance built up to this sort of thing. I know I do. As I was testing this, I just found the satisfaction of seeing those big ignite explosions. That just totally outweighed the minor inconvenience of that little setup time with each click. In fact, the setup time, you barely even notice it because you're going to set up your totem and then spend time running around, either running forward to the next enemies, or if you're at a boss, kind of kiting around. So I found no complaints there. Totally understand if that's not everybody's cup of tea, but it was okay with me. Now, at this point, I have got to mention a really amazing tool that was recently featured on Reddit. This is absolutely going to be a part of my league start, and I hope if anybody sees this video before their league start that you consider it as well. Now, in the past, I took these Excel documents you often see passed around, these kind of step-by-step campaign guides that tell you which order to do the quests in and that kind of thing. I heavily doctored them up. I tried to include, when do I go back to town? When do I take certain gems? When do I take certain quest rewards? Stuff like that. Now, this tool that was developed by Reddit user Heart of Foes, PHOS, what this tool does is it takes your path of building code, just like you're posting it for somebody to load up, but it's going to read that code, find which gems you're using and at which stage of the game, and it's going to work those gem timings into a customized step-by-step guide. It's going to tell you when to return to town, when to take each gem, when to buy a gem, and how much it's going to cost. As you can see, this thing is color coded. It's got a smooth user interface. I've seen professional products that don't have quite as good a user interface. So really, I got to give all credit to this Heart of Foes guy. I think he's amazing. This is going to save me hours of fiddling around with assembling my own little doctored Excel sheet. The only minor thing I can think of that might make it better for a potential future version is either an automated function or the ability to manually enter things like start looking for this part of a vendor recipe, start looking for an essence or a blacksmith whetstone or whatever the case may be. Look for a rustic sash. This is a super minor note, since you can kind of usually, if you're used to this, you can do it on autopilot. I know I do. And honestly, in any case, you can't even really control exactly when you're going to find those things, so it would only ever be a note to like, hey, start looking out for it, not a note to say, hey, go do this thing right now. But very minor, and I don't want that to take away from how amazing the tool is overall. Going to help me out a lot. As you can see, tool even has a nice checkbox system that lets you select the links that you're looking for, and it will construct a little regex string that you can paste into the vendor search window really quickly every time you're in town. Super simple, and it will highlight gear that meets your requirements. There are also some smaller options, like whether it's league start or not, which is useful for making sure the lab trials are included, and then whether you need the library quest or not. Most builds do like to take the library quest on league start so that they can get their build online by Act 4 instead of by Act 6, but it's nice to have it as a toggleable option. Maybe you don't need it for your build. So again, this is very much going to smooth the way to maps, but then once I get to maps, what's the plan? So last league, I did a bit of infinite heisting at the beginning, before I even finished the campaign. I think a lot of people did that last league. That was definitely fun. I recommend it. I've got nothing against it, and I just think I'm going to shake it up and do something a little different this time. I'm going to dive straight into map-based expedition encounters so that I can progress my atlas while I'm also farming some of what is really my favorite content. And I suspect that the EA Ballista champ is going to do very well at this content. The ability to kite, the ability to hit things from a distance, explode whole packs. Yeah, I think the fit is going to be very good there. Now, I had been planning to do expedition like this for a few days now, and it's just by really good fortune that right before I started recording this video, GGG released screenshots of new Atlas passes that let you more closely target farm specific expedition members in your maps. This is amazing. I love it. And just in general, doing expedition should give me an easy in for when I decide to switch over to logbooks, which is one of my favorite types of content. Before logbooks, I'm going to see if I can get my AoE up a bit. It might be fun to include Legion in this strategy as well. I'm totally a sucker for a build that can clear a full Legion, and like I've said a couple times now, these Ignite pops are juicy on this build, so I'd like to see what a buffed up AoE could do to Legions with the build. Ultimately, I would like to push this build quite a ways, and then when I get to around the approximately 75% mark, obviously that's kind of arbitrary, kind of subjective, but when you get to the point where the next gear upgrade would be more than double-digit divines, it's starting to get pretty chunky on upgrades. At that point, I'm probably going to look for a second build instead, something that would look good for Wave 30 Simulacrum, because Simulacrum along with logbooks is some of my favorite endgame content. It'd be great to have another character that can do that. I'm kind of assuming that it's going to be difficult to push the Ballista Totem character to do Simulacrum, because you really need to be ailment immune for that content. So it would kind of rely on if the EA champ can do Waves 30 Simulacrum, if it's got enough damage to do it without one of its damage ores, like take away Malevolence, because you would need to use Purity of Elements to fairly easily get immunity to elemental ailments. If you don't have immunity to elemental ailments, Wave 30 Simulacrum is probably going to clap you. So probably a second build at that point, and then right then I can choose. I mean, whichever build is feeling better to me at the moment is the one that I can upgrade more next. I might even decide that I'm up for a third build at that point. So I think that is about it for my league start plans. I'm open to suggestions on other videos to do next once we get started with the league. I'm going to try and kind of alternate back and forth between beginner oriented videos and then stuff that's aimed at the more experienced players who kind of know some of these terms and maybe are looking for more advanced guides. So just let me know what you're looking for and I'll do my best to get it out to you. Thanks for tuning in. Take it easy, everybody.